I married you to take care of her, remember? My husband said with a smirk as he lugged a massive black suitcase behind him and stepped out through the front door, leaving his bedridden mother and me behind. He was off to Hawaii with a skip in his step. I couldn't believe he was going on a vacation, leaving his ailing mother. Although he was never the most considerate man, this was a new law that left me speechless. I swore to myself he'd pay. At that moment, my mother-in-law stood up with a smile and said, "Let's go us two." I was so taken aback, I didn't know how to respond. "Go where?" I managed to ask. She just grinned back at me and twinkled in her eye. "My name's Susan. I'm 42. I met my husband at work. We became close after many shared coffee breaks and got married when I was 33. I quit the job after marriage. Since then, I've been working part-time at the daycare center, using my degree in early childhood education to contribute to our household expenses, all while managing the house. Both my parents are no longer here. Both of my parents passed away from cancer. It happened when I was 30. My father passed first, and my mother followed soon after. I've been pouring all the love they left behind into my mother-in-law and the kids at the daycare. My mother-in-law treats me with such kindness. That alone makes my marriage to my husband worthwhile. I truly love her. Sadly, we've been unable to have children, and now I'm this old. It's really heartbreaking that I can't show her the face of her grandchild. I feel really sorry about it. Moreover, my husband tended to vent his frustration on her, which fills me with guilt. Why can't my husband cherish his own blood-related parent? Although his behavior toward her at home is appearing, he takes good care of her in public, which stops me from getting angry at him. To make up for it, I rented an apartment about a 15-minute drive from her house, so I can easily check up on her living alone. It was during one of those days. When I was doing housework after finishing my job, my cell phone rang. It was from my husband, who should have been at work. "Hello? What's happened?" When I answered, I could hear the distress in my husband's voice. Well, according to him, my sprightly mother-in-law had fallen and was taken to the hospital in an ambulance. I was shocked and worried. She was such an active, healthy woman. "She is at the hospital right now, but I can leave work. Could you go to the hospital instead?" he asked. I agreed immediately, and after taking off my apron, I rushed to the hospital he had mentioned. Upon reaching, I found my mother-in-law lying there, dressed in a patient gown. "I'm sorry you had to come. It would have been better if John was here." Seeing the genuine regrets on my mother-in-law's face, I was flustered. "Don't apologize. You're like my real mother. It's only natural for your daughter to come." "You always put me in your debt, Susan. Thank you." Her normally vibrant smile was dimmed. It was sad to see her so unlike herself. From what I gathered, she had been knocked over by a large man on the street and had fallen down. I heard that the big man had fled, feigning ignorance. I learned that there had been a police incident before I arrived, and to avoid burdening my exhausted mother-in-law, I sat down and called the doctor to ask the details. But luckily enough, she hadn't fractured her hip, but rather the part of her back close to it. She would need to be hospitalized for a bit, but I was told she would be fine with physical therapy after that. This brought me some relief. "Hey, I hate to ask, but could you go to the hospital and take care of Mom for a while?" my husband said as soon as he came home. I had already informed about the severity of the injury and doctor's advice to him over the phone. I sighed at the sound of his voice, which didn't seem apologetic at all even as he said sorry. "But you'll at least visit her, right?" I asked my husband, who always made plans to go out on Saturdays and Sundays, but he let out an exaggerated sigh and said, "No, I got plans on the weekends. I've been invited to play golf and drink by my boss. I can't say no to that." I was so shocked that I couldn't say a word. "But she's your mother." As I said this, my husband just said with a faint smile, "So what? My job comes first. I leave everything to you." "Oh, and I've already eaten." With that, he stripped off his suit and headed for the bathroom. It was his usual routine, but I thought this was too strange, even for him. He often ate dinner before coming home, but his boss couldn't be so terrible as to prevent him from even paying a visit. At the moment, I made up my mind, but not yet. The real challenge was still ahead. I decided to take a leave of absence from work due to needing to prepare for things like changing clothes, since the hospitalization would last about a month. My director gave me his approval willingly, and so a month passed. In the end, my husband didn't visit even once. I didn't feel angry anymore. I was just tired of my husband. That was 2 days before her discharge. It's about Mom. When I asked him what he meant, my husband unilaterally continued the conversation. After her discharge, I was to take care of her, and to do that, I would have to live with my mother-in-law in her house. All of this was up to me, and since he didn't know when he would return, he would have to keep our rented apartment as it is. Since my mother-in-law still needed physical therapy and nursing care, I decided to extend my leave of absence. Although the number of children to take care of increasing during the summer vacation, my director kindly said, please manage it properly. While my mother-in-law was now able to sit up in bed, she still needed help from others. That is, if she was left alone, she would become bedridden. I rented a remote control electric reclining bed for my mother-in-law's room, bought a bouquet the next day, and went to pick up my mother-in-law who was being discharged. My mother-in-law was very pleased to receive the bouquet and thanked me many times. My husband didn't come. I knew why, but I didn't do anything for now. Doing all the housework and caring for my mother-in-law was hard but not painful. I found it heartwarming to see her gradually recovering. I had been living in my mother-in-law's house for 3 months. It was around the time when her health started to improve. My husband, who hadn't provided any care to his biological mother for those 3 months, instead often being madly running off to our rental house, was now in good spirits. Next to him was a large black suitcase. Where are you planning to go? Even though I already knew the answer, yet I dared to ask. It's Hawaii, baby. Gotta burn through some PDO. I'll be there for a week. I married you for the caregiving, so I'm counting on ya. As he left, looking down on me, he picked up his large suitcase, opened the front door, and left. He cheerfully left his bedridden mother and me behind, headed off to Hawaii. How could he leave his own mother, who needs care, and go on a trip? He's always been a man without much empathy, but this was just too much. It left me speechless. I will make him suffer. That's when my mother-in-law, smiling, rose to her feet. Well, let's go ourselves. I was so surprised to see her suddenly stand up that I couldn't react properly. Where to? I asked in return. She said with a sparkling smile, to our new home. My mother-in-law said it with a carefree tone. However, I was more concerned about her injury. Mother-in-law, when were you able to get out of bed? I was bored being alone, so I started doing physical therapy. There's nothing wrong with my bones anymore. I'm sorry for keeping it a secret. I just wanted to surprise you. My mother-in-law laughed cheerfully. My vibrant mother-in-law was back. However, I was still in a state of confusion. I'm glad to see you standing, but a new home? When I asked, my mother-in-law responded in a bright voice. Yes, let's get everything moved while he's gone. Don't worry, I had a modern house built just 3 stations away. We can move with just 1 phone call. Then my mother-in-law told me something unexpected. She had received a large sum of money from the insurance after my father-in-law, who had passed away in a car accident. A friend she met at daycare had offered to rent this house. I didn't think this house, as small and old as it is, was enough to leave to you. She said the new house was barrier-free, considering our old age. It was already around the time I got injured, and while I was deciding when to move, this whole situation came about. But my mother-in-law continued, now I can repay you for your kindness. Let's quickly call the movers and get this done. She chuckled, and I couldn't help but smile too. We rented a wheelchair for my mother-in-law, who could stand but still found walking difficult. We took a medical transport taxi and headed to our new home. The new home looked like a church, complete with a yard. It was a 2-story, stand-alone house. That day, we asked the movers to transfer everything except my husband's personal belongings. Setting up little things like plates was one thing, but getting the larger pieces like wardrobes places correctly, and then just turning on the electricity and gas was another. My mother-in-law had quickly arranged it all over the phone. "Susan, thank you so much." Out of the blue, she said this to me as we were settled down, eating takeout. "Oh no, you don't need to thank me," what she said next took me by surprise. "It's alright. I know everything." It seems like we ended up hiring the same private investigator. Suddenly, it clicked. I realized she knew that I knew why my husband had gone to Hawaii. "You knew?" She nodded sadly. "Well, I am his mother, after all." I knew something was off. Now, what should we do? I had made up my mind. Let's decide when he returns from Hawaii. A week had passed since my husband left for Hawaii. My cell phone rang, notifying me of a call from my husband. As I expected, I thought to myself and picked up the phone. "Hey, what's going on? I can open the house and no one's answering the doorbell. Where are you?" I inadvertently grimaced at his loud voice. "The house keys have been changed for the new resident. Your belongings are at your place." Hearing this, my husband shouted in frustration. "What? What's happening?" I patiently explained to my clueless husband. "Your mother's house is hers, not yours, and the only house under your name is rented apartment. So, even though it was hassle, I moved all your stuff to the apartment." As expected, my husband blew up. "What's with your attitude? Where are you? At the apartment?" I let out a sigh. "I can't tell you where I am. Your things are packed in suitcase. So why don't you go back to the apartment quickly and maybe call your mistress?" Suddenly, my husband was flustered. What? How do you?" I sighed again. "Reflect on your actions. I had a private investigator look into it because I was suspicious. I'm prepared for divorce." "Wait, let me at least talk to ma'am." "Mother-in-law, John would like to talk to you. What do you think?" I turned to my mother-in-law sitting on the bed. "May I borrow your phone for a moment?" My mother-in-law said this with a smile, so I handed over my cell phone with a smile too. "Oh, Mom, come on, you're kidding, right? Enough with the jokes." My mother-in-law said, pretending to be surprised. "Are you still saying such things? Even after having an affair? Don't you have any shame? It seems like I may have gone wrong in bringing you up. Everything Susan is saying is correct. There's nothing more to add." After saying that, she handed the phone back to me, still smiling, and added, "If you have something to say, go ahead." "I'm sorry. It seems like I read him not properly, so it led to you marrying such a foolish and overly optimistic person." My mother-in-law spoke loudly, making sure the voice could be heard on the other end of the phone. "Well, that's how it is." She unilaterally hung up the phone and turned it off for now. We are now in our long-awaited new home. We had just finished the morning chores and were having a casual conversation with my mother-in-law. Her room was the spacious garden view room. My room was on the second floor. The living room and kitchen were on the first floor. I opened my cell phone on the small shelf, and finally, my mind settled and laughter welled up within me. My mother-in-law was also smiling warmly and kindly. It felt good. Now, how did we end up in this situation? Well, believe it or not, my mother-in-law was also using the same private investigation agency to investigate my husband's whereabouts. The reason the agency didn't inform us was because they had a strict confidentiality obligation towards the client, and it was effective within families, so they couldn't say anything. My resourceful and energetic mother-in-law had been skillfully using the phone while doing physical therapy on her bed. Her proactive nature was truly admirable. It turned out that my husband had been cheating for quite some time. Furthermore, his outings with his boss were actually visits to strip clubs. His affair partner was a woman from one of their business partners. Apparently, he approached her himself while she was working as a salesperson. It's such a ridiculous story. I wish I could return all the time I spent living with such a person. That's why I intended to hire a lawyer and get a divorce. It might make my husband happy as well. He can fully indulge in his beloved saleswoman. It remains to be seen what will happen when his facade crumbled. A few days later, please, don't divorce me. I've never seen my husband so pathetic before. When I went to the apartment to pick up some of my stuff, he suddenly appeared and apologized. Why? You have someone else, don't you? I naturally replied. In response, my husband burst into tears. He can't handle doing household chores on his own. His affair with the saleswoman was purely a way to fulfill his desires, and he never thought of marrying her seriously. And above all, my mother-in-law said she wants to sever ties with him when he got divorced. Those factors have piled up, and it seems like my husband is at his wit's end. Honestly, I couldn't care less about what happened with his affair partner, and I don't have even a tiny bit of love or sympathy left for my husband. And there's one more thing. If we get divorced, my mother-in-law has offered to adopt me. Apparently, it's her way of repairing me. I was delighted by the idea because I love my mother-in-law, but it also puzzled me since we don't have any grandchildren. Nevertheless, my mother-in-law strongly urged me to go through with the adoption. One reason is that she wants to live together, but there's also an underlying motive. She wants to transfer all her inheritance to me because she feels responsible for the trouble her incompetent son caused. My mother-in-law is seriously intent on severing ties with her son, so I must also face this situation seriously. To be honest, I was truly happy about it. When she proposed the adoption, I even cried at first, having lost my parents at a young age and been betrayed by my husband. My mother-in-law's smile was my only solace. You're getting what you deserve for neglecting your mother-in-law. Now you have no choice but to be alone, I said coldly. Can I at least talk to my mom? My mother-in-law has no intention of talking to you anymore. If you keep insisting, I'll call the police. What will you do? Upon hearing this, my husband burst into tears while making sounds. I looked at his face expressionlessly. Since the discussion with my husband didn't go well, we ended up hiring a lawyer and living into the family court. The result was, of course, in my favor. Thanks to his infidelity and visits to strip clubs, I was able to divorce him smoothly, even though he argued. Although my savings, which I had planned to use for building a house someday, were halved in the division of assets, I don't mind. My mother-in-law's condition has been steadily improving, and by the time the trial was over, she had fully recovered and even resumed her works. Today, we are celebrating the completion of the adoption process by dining at a fancy restaurant. Having a meal while chatting happily truly brings me happiness, and I am thrilled that she treats me not only as a real daughter, but even more affectionately. In the future, it's likely that I will need to provide constant care for my mother-in-law, but I have no complaints. In any case, my mother-in-law seems to have truly had enough of my ex-husband, so she decided to break off relations with her son and never meet again. I had already had the lawyer prepare a document for severing ties when the time came, and to ensure that I didn't receive any phone calls from my ex-husband, my mother-in-law had set up call rejection for his calls. By request, I did it for her. By the way, I heard from a former co-worker the other day. My mother-in-law is waiting with a gentle smile for the construction. John seems to be unable to pay the rent and utilities on his own, so he borrows money from his boss every month. My mother-in-law covered her mouth with her hand. Oh dear, I feel sorry for him. That's right, I said with a smile. He has borrowed money from various financial institutions as well. The reason for the divorce has leaked through my friends, and it seems that he is not respected by his superiors, and the story of infidelity had spread, making him feel uncomfortable at work. It's quite satisfying. While it is said that one should not take pleasure in the misfortunes of others, I used to believe that it didn't apply to me. But now, it's different. When it comes to my ex-husband, the misfortunes of others are indeed sweet. While enjoying a fancy dinner, I wished for further misfortune upon my ex-husband.